Hi, everyone. This is Michelle with the Sleep Coach School, and I'm back with another open class. This is Open Class 140, so let's get started. Our first question is from Salvador, and he says, for the past month, I have been having trouble sleeping. It just happened from one bad night of sleep and continued. I had this problem about 3 years back, and it lasted for 7 months, but it disappeared on its own. Now I seem to be back to it again. I can fall asleep fine, but I wake up at the same time every night, maybe around 5, and I can't go back to sleep anymore. I've always been a good sleeper, but now it seems like anxiety has gotten bad. Even if I do have a good night's sleep, I still feel fear throughout the day instead of feeling happy that I slept, like I used to feel when I would sleep during the insomnia period 3 years ago. Can you help? So Salvador, thank you for writing in with this question. It's really common what you're describing, having this experience that, all of a sudden you have this sleepless night and it really kicks off this period of insomnia. And, it's almost as though it triggers this fear in us. And then that fear kind of continues as, we go into the next night and we start to think, well, wait, I didn't sleep last night. Am I going to sleep tonight? What if it happens again tonight? And that pattern starts to continue. And then we start to emotionally and mentally, we start to react to everything that's happening with kind of more fear, more anxiety. And so pretty soon, we're perpetuating everything that's happening almost through our own responses to everything that's actually unfolding night after night. So very common, very normal that this would be happening. And you even actually mentioned it in your question at some point, Salvador. You mentioned, this anxiety is getting really bad. And, that's exactly it. This is really, really fundamentally not about sleep, even though that's how it's showing up. This is about fear. This is about anxiety. And that's what this experience is all about. And so when you mention, you're falling asleep okay, but you're waking up every day around 5 o'clock in the morning and you just can't fall back asleep. This is also really common. It is, as you mentioned as well, it's because of hyperarousal. It's because of that anxiety and that fear response that's happening. For some people, it prevents them from falling asleep. And for other people, it, makes them wake up really early in the morning and they can't fall back asleep. But fundamentally, it is the same issue. It is that anxiety. It is that fear that is causing that hyperarousal process in the brain to happen around sleep every single night. And really, this is your brain trying to protect you. As frustrating as that sounds, your brain is just a giant primitive safety machine that is trying to keep you safe. And right now, your brain is pretty convinced that sleeping, nighttime, not sleeping and being awake, all of that stuff feels pretty unsafe to your brain right now. And so again, those hyperarousal levels are going to be, high and making it so that you're waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So the first thing that I thought I would share with you to get started, Salvador, is when you start waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, as your pattern has been, can you take a moment to start observing and noticing what your reaction is to this wake up? What's happening for you in terms of what sort of thoughts are coming up at 5 o'clock in the morning when you wake up? What kind of emotions are you feeling? Essentially, what is your response to being up at 5 o'clock in the morning, morning after morning? Very commonly it would be immediate frustration, anger, fear, anxiety, all of it kind of starting. You might notice a lot of that kind of mental conversation with yourself of, oh gosh, here we go again. I'm up, it's 5, I'm not going to be able to fall back asleep. I have to wake up soon, kind of all of that. So I think that's really the first step, is start to see if you can start to observe yourself, start to really notice, okay, how am I really responding to these 5 a.m. wake ups? Because your response is actually very powerful. And again, remember, your brain is afraid. It thinks something bad is happening. It thinks being awake at night, especially at 5 a.m., is a threat. So see if you can start to tune into those responses and start to notice, oh, okay, my response to what's happening is actually perpetuating the fear and anxiety cycle. And that's the first step, because if we don't have that awareness, then we can't kind of step back and make a different choice. And so, really, really start there, because I know that's a difficult process, because we're not used to kind of observing and noticing what our reactions are. So I want to start there. And, I want to give you another idea at that point too, is once you're able to really notice how you're responding, see if you can start to kind of detach or stop identifying with a lot of the fearful thoughts that are coming up, since that's really difficult to do, and just see them for what they are, which is just really a lot of fear-based thoughts being created by a brain that is stuck in fear right now. Another great way to start with all of this, after you've started to notice your response, is to start to work on what we call befriending wakefulness. And this is really a way of accepting that you're awake at a time that you don't want to be awake, but accepting it and allowing it to happen, and teaching your brain that it's okay. That despite the fact that you wish you were sleeping, that you're still safe and you're still completely okay, even though you might be feeling exhausted, and as though you would prefer to be sleeping. So befriending wakefulness can look like a lot of different things. I always like to encourage a bit of self-experimentation to find what feels right for you. This could be anything from choosing to stay in bed and rest because it's comfortable and it's warm. It could be getting up, watching your favorite show, reading a book in bed, or any other hobby that you enjoy that makes you feel kind of calm and safe. And see if you can start, actually doing some of these things when you're awake at 5 o'clock in the morning, after you've noticed how you're responding to this wake up. See if you can reach for something that's going to make you feel safe. And this isn't about pretending as though want to be awake at 5 a.m. This is about acknowledging that it's happening, and that you're going to work on acceptance and reinforcing that you're okay despite being awake at 5. And over time, as you can see, this is working on your response to all this. That's what's going to help reduce the hyperarousal, by teaching your brain that it's okay to be awake at 5 a.m. Nothing horrible is happening here. We're safe. And so over time, that hyperarousal is going to go down. And then pretty soon you're going to notice that these 5 a.m. wake ups start to be a little bit less prominent, and eventually not at all. And I want to mention something else that you spoke about, Salvador, this idea that, you're also feeling really fearful throughout the day. So not only is this happening at night when you wake up, but throughout the entire day. That's really common as well. Again, a lot of us get really stuck in our anxiety, in our fear patterns, and it becomes almost like a autopilot in our brains that starts to run all day long. And again, this goes back to this idea that our brain is really trying to protect us. And so it thinks that if it reminds you of this all day long, well, what about tonight? What will tonight look like? Are you going to be safe later tonight? That it's actually helping you, when of course this is actually not helpful. So one thing one practice that I really love to do during my insomnia recovery was a journaling practice that I like to call a constructive worry practice. I'm choosing this practice for you right now because it sounds like you have a lot of worry throughout the day, and this can be really helpful to get some of that out. So what I did was I chose a time during the day. So for me, it was after work, but it was well before bedtime. That's key. Don't do it right before bed. And I gave myself about 20 minutes every single day. So choose a time that you can fit in, even if it's 10 minutes, that's fine. And just, grab a pen and a paper and write down all the different worries, all of the anxiety, just everything that's kind of swirling around in your head all day long, write it out on paper. And there are so many reasons why this is helpful. A couple of those reasons are because, the moment we're actually writing down, we're slowing down the way our brain is actually thinking. We have to slow it down to get it out on paper. And then because we're getting it out on paper, we're creating some much needed distance between ourselves and all of those fearful thoughts, which again is going to reinforce that we are not our thoughts. And, they are out on paper, we are observing them. And so get them all out in this constructive worry practice every single day. And the other thing I like to do is right after I had all of my worries out in front of me, I like to ask myself, what is the common emotional theme behind everything I have just written down? And so often for me, it was fear. Everything I was writing down kind of had this underlying or underpinning of emotional fear. And I would sit and I would read them back and I would recognize this fear and I would allow myself to feel that fear. And, and that looked different depending on the day. And I would allow myself to feel it and I would intentionally be with this fear. Sometimes I would talk out loud to this fear and say, I hear you. I know you're trying to protect me. I'm listening. I'm here. I'm with you. And I know on the surface that might sound a little bit strange to talk out loud to your fear, but remember that your brain is trying to protect you. It really wants you to listen. So a lot of the times, these types of journaling practices, part of what makes them so helpful is because we are actively listening to what our brain is so concerned about. So they can be really helpful. And, especially if you're going to choose the same time every day, which I do recommend for a practice like this, it can even start to help train your brain to begin worrying or to isolate that worry more at that time of the day, because you've reinforced to your brain, you're going to give it this time. It's going to get this period of 10 to 20 minutes every single day to worry, and that you're going to really tune in and listen. And oftentimes that can mean that we worry less throughout the day, we worry less throughout the night, because we have this active period of really listening and engaging with these worries and allowing them to actually come forward, as opposed to just kind of holding on and white knuckling through the whole day. So I would recommend you give that a try. That can be really helpful. And the one last thing I want to touch on before we move on is how you had mentioned that you had had this period of insomnia before some years ago. I think you said for about 7 months, and then it just disappeared. And it kind of went away on its own, is how you described it. So I thought that was an interesting thing. And I would encourage you to see if you can look back to what you did, or rather probably what you didn't do to have that insomnia completely kind of go away on its own. Because remember, our insomnia needs our attention, our energy, our input, all of it to continue to thrive. So I wonder if you can look back and maybe look for some evidence of the fact that, very likely it wasn't about what you were doing at the time. It was about what you probably weren't doing, which is focusing a lot of attention, doing a lot of research and getting really lost in all of it, like we all do. Maybe life got really busy and you were focusing on other things, but it's always interesting to look back when something like insomnia clears up on its own, because we can start to see that in fact, it was all the things we weren't doing, all the problem solving we weren't doing, and all the attention that we weren't giving it. So I hope that helps, Salvador. Feel free to write some comments below if you have any follow-up questions. And with that, let's move on to our next question. Our next question is from Mackenzie. She says, hello, great book, Set It and Forget It. Mackenzie, also one of my favorites from Daniel. It was the first one I actually read. It was really, really life-changing for me, so I'm glad to hear it was great for you as well. I now enjoy my life. Question, I awaken too early. 15 years ago, I would pass out for 9 hours some nights. Now I sleep between 5.5 and 6.5 hours straight, which is still good, but I feel I need a nap. So I fall asleep on the couch for 20 to 40 minutes. just to stay awake till 8. Then I sleep and awake at 2. Should I say goodbye to naps and force myself to stay awake until 9, which would be extremely difficult? Main question, do we really sleep less as we get older? All right, Mackenzie. Yes, so our sleep does change as we age, both in terms of quality and duration of sleep. This is completely normal to experience changes in the way we sleep as we age. So it's really important just to know, yes, this is absolutely normal. Nothing to, be concerned about there. And also, I want to come back to this idea that oftentimes, if we're sleeping between, let's say, 5 and 6.5 hours, we kind of can start worrying about that, thinking, well, it's okay, but this isn't long enough. I should really be sleeping more. And this is based on, that pesky 8-hour myth that is, really out there in the mainstream, that we should all be sleeping for 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep every night in order to be okay and healthy. And it's just not true. It really is a myth, and it's just so harmful to so many of us, especially those of us with insomnia who are kind of chasing after this goal of this perfect 8-hour uninterrupted sleep, which doesn't exist for anybody. And in reality, when they've actually measured adults sleeping, healthy adults sleep much closer to 6 to 6.5 hours per night, not 8 hours. And that includes multiple wake ups throughout the night. So waking up throughout the night, completely normal. Sleeping between 6.5, around 6 to 6.5 hours, also very normal. So just know, when you mention you're sleeping between 5.5, 6.5 hours straight throughout the night, that's great. And so I was sensing you might feel some pressure to extend that. But if you're feeling good and that's what you're, sleeping each night, then that's really great. And there's no need to feel like you should be extending that, or that's not enough, or that's not good enough, because it's simply not true. I know you mentioned that 15 years ago, you could sleep for 9 hours straight at times. And, that's tricky because it's such a huge amount of, 15 years is a pretty significant amount of time. And your life may have looked very different at that time. And, our sleep does change as we age. And, interestingly enough, a lot of the studies that are looking at sleep and sleep duration is, longer durations of sleep, 9, 10 hours, are not necessarily associated with better health outcomes. They're often associated with worse health outcomes. And, that's not a direct correlation by any means, but it's more the suspicion that if somebody is sleeping 9, 10, or 11 hours a night, oftentimes this reflects some sort of an underlying health issue that they could be dealing with or recovering from, as opposed to kind of the average amount of sleep that a normal healthy adult gets, which is, again, closer to that 6.5 hour mark. So just to put that out there, that your sleep is perfectly great the way it is. And I know you were asking about napping. So there's nothing wrong with napping. And I know that a lot of us feel like we shouldn't nap. And there's a lot of pressure out there to not nap for some reasons. We feel guilty about it. But in your case, you're having a brief nap, and it's not interfering with you going to bed and sleeping at night. So in that case, there's really no reason to stop napping. You mentioned you're falling asleep around 8, you're getting up at 2. And while that's a fairly early wake time, it also sounded like in the question that pushing yourself till 9 o'clock or later would be really, really difficult. And it sounded like something you didn't really want to do. And so, I mean, unless you really need to shift your sleep window for, a personal reason of really wanting to get up a little bit later, there's no reason that you need to stop taking naps. There's no reason why you need to shift the current window of time that you were sleeping, again, unless you want to, for whatever personal reason you may have. But on the surface of it, there's nothing wrong with the naps that you're taking. And I would say it's not about whether we nap or not, it's our perception of our naps. So as much of you as you can, see your naps as something that you're doing as self-care to take care of yourself, as an act of self-love, and then there should be no inner conflict when it comes to naps. All right, Mackenzie, I hope that helps. Feel free to write me in the comments below if you have any follow-up questions. Okay, our final question is from DT, and he says, I feel like I am super sensitive to noise. I put earplugs in, and then I start to hear my own breath and heartbeat. I listened to a lot of your videos. I understand it is related to hyperarousal. What do you suggest? Just let it be, right? Even if it bothers me, I should not try to suppress it, but it does keep me away from sleepiness. DT, I completely understand where you're coming from. When I read your question, it really brought me back to a lot of my own insomnia struggles. For the first couple of years of my insomnia, the main reason I couldn't fall asleep, and of course, this was before I learned about hyperarousal and anxiety and fear, so I didn't know any of that. All I knew is that every single night, my heart rate was really fast, it was loud. I could feel it in my chest, kind of pounding, and really, really quickly. I also have always worn earplugs to bed at night. And so I could also hear my heartbeat really loudly in my ears every single night. And again, I had no idea what was going on. I would often either, try to stay in bed and try to force my heart rate to go down. That doesn't work, of course. And, more than anything, I was really, really scared hearing and feeling my heart rate like this. It was, it made me panic. And of course, as you would know, DT, the moment you start to panic and you start to have that fear response to your own heartbeat, the more your heartbeat is going to elevate even more because of all the stress you're adding on with panic. So I feel as though I was trapped in this cycle with my heartbeat for just such a long time. And a big part of it for me was really not understanding why this was happening. And that created a lot of fear for me. Again, I thought maybe I could have a heart problem or that, it must be really harmful and all these types of things. And so a lot of my own reactions of fear, I didn't realize at the time were actually perpetuating the hyperarousal and prolonging and increasing my own heart rate, my own high heart rate, I should say. So, you mentioned hyperarousal in your comments. You're already much further ahead than I was at the time. So you actually already know, and you're correct. This is one of the many, many symptoms that we can have from hyperarousal, from our brains being really afraid around, sleep and not sleeping, and even when nighttime approaches, all of it. And it can create a lot of stress and anxiety, and that can, very normally increase our heart rate. And you're absolutely right. When we wear earplugs, we can hear our heartbeat and other internal, body noises even more than we normally would. And this can make it seem even worse or even more loud than it actually is. So I'll put that out there as well, is the earplugs are making you hear the heartbeat even more than you normally would. And it might be even creating more fear around that particular issue. So, we know that we can't force the heartbeat to go down. We know that all we can do is know that it's hyperarousal and start to work on our mind and on that anxiety and on that fear piece of things, because that's what this is really all about. The heart beating quickly, that's just a symptom. That's not the core issue. And really come back to that core issue of fear and anxiety and work with our mind on that issue so that over time, the hyperarousal decreases. As the hyperarousal decreases, the heart rate is going to start to return to more of a calmer, more normal level at night. So one of the first things I did upon learning about hyperarousal and how my high heart rate was connected to this was, now when I started to feel my heart rate get really high at night and I start to really, hear it, feel it in my body and hear it in my ears, instead of reacting with a lot of fear, I would kind of reassure myself that this was normal, this was okay. I was still safe even though my heart rate was high. I even started to try to imagine how my heart was pumping blood throughout my body and helping my body thrive, and seeing all the positive things that my heart and my heart rate were actually doing for me on a daily basis, because I had become really afraid of hearing my own heartbeat. As strange as that sounds, but I have a feeling, DT, you can relate to that fear. So I started to intentionally kind of reframe this a little bit to remind myself all the great things that my heart and my heart rate is doing for my body. And I would, feel it and hear this at night, and I would reassure myself, it's okay. All of this is okay. Can I actually be with this elevated heart rate right now? Can I just be with this? And there were many nights where I would just lay in bed resting, and I would allow it, my heart rate to be at whatever rate it was going to be. And I would just be with it. And there were other nights where I would choose to get up and do something that I would enjoy. And because I knew that this was going to help ultimately reduce hyperarousal in the long term. So that's another thing you can do beyond knowing that this is safe and this is because of hyperarousal, and seeing if you can reframe and accept this. You can also work on befriending wakefulness in any way that feels good for you. So again, anything that you're doing at night that's going to reinforce that you're okay, you're safe, everything is going to be okay, and actually makes you feel that way, is going to be helpful, and is going to be a way you can start to befriend being awake at night with that high heart rate. So self-experiment a little bit, see what works best for you, whether it's resting in bed and just being with it and accepting it, or maybe it's getting up and doing something that you enjoy just to reinforce that you're okay, and see what works best for you. And just know that over time, as you work on these things, as you work on reducing the fear and the anxiety, that this hyperarousal is going to go down, and then your heart rate's going to go down as well. So I hope that helps. That's it for today, everyone. As always, keep writing in your questions. We love receiving them. And if anybody has comments or questions below, we always love hearing from you. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, everyone.